What's up, everybody? Brent Axe here from syracuse.com, and we are live here on the syracuse.com Syracuse football Facebook page. We are live following what was one heck of a football game at the Carrier Dome, a pretty embarrassing performance, frankly, by Syracuse, particularly on the defensive end of things. 64-43 was the final score at the Carrier Dome. I predicted earlier this week on syracuse.com this would be a shootout, and a shootout won by Wake Forest, but you just never know what you're going to see on any given day in college football and in sports. To get a 64-43 game at the Dome sounds crazy, but then when you put Zach Mahoney on the field at quarterback, apparently anything can happen. So anything did happen, and a lot of it was not good for Syracuse, especially in the second half of this game. So we've got plenty to talk about here. So if you are joining us here on Facebook Live, please please share this. Let people know we're here doing this. We'll get people a little bit of time to get in here and be a part of this. But what an incredible game at the Dome. This is a game that Syracuse led at halftime, 38-24. That Syracuse at one point had a 17-point lead in, but there was a little swing of momentum. It's funny because we were talking about this last week in a totally different game, a much closer game, certainly, against Florida State. In the decisions you make and the things that happen right before halftime that can affect how a game goes. And last week it was that Dino Babers did not go for two, or that he did go for it and did not take the points in that game, and, kind of came back to bite Syracuse, but that was still a 27-24 football game. In this case, Syracuse is up 38-24. 38-21, right before the half. There's only 16 seconds on the clock, and Wake Forest drives right down the field and kicks a field goal, and Syracuse still goes into the half with a 38-24 lead. But, again, the beauty of kind of doing a live chat and social media, you kind of mark the time as you go. There was a lot of concern there. There was a lot of concern, like, whoa, wait a minute. Wake Forest has some momentum here. Something's happening. Something's not right. And even in the second half, as Syracuse gained a 41-27 lead, it just never felt like they were in control of this game. And that feeling turned out to be validated for Syracuse football fans. Syracuse was outscored in the second half of this game, 40-5. It was 43-38 at halftime, 64-24 score there. The final score was 64-43. It's incredible to see Wake Forest have 24 at halftime and end up with 64 points in the way that they did. Now, John Wolford, the quarterback for Wake Forest, deserves a lot of credit for the way that he played here today. But make no mistake about it, folks, this was an embarrassing performance on the part of Syracuse defensive coordinator Brian Ward, which is interesting because it's almost like all the issues that the Syracuse defense has masked so far this season came flooding out in this football game. Think about it. Syracuse's 5 losses up until today, they had not lost a game by 10 points, by more than 10 points. Then all of a sudden, you let Wake Forest drop a 64 spot on you at home, mind you. And a lot of Syracuse football fans have been critical of Brian Ward and, were a little skeptical about the defense, but the results were there. Syracuse was one of the best teams in the country on third down. We mentioned they had not lost a game by more than 10 points. They had not created a lot of turnovers this year. Syracuse still in the bottom half of the country in that department, but the defense was drastically better than what it was a season ago. And I'll tell you what, I think Stephen Bailey asked a really good question in the press conference. I don't know if you caught Dino Babers' press conference, but Syracuse faced a lot of really good quarterbacks last year, many of which are in the National Football League now. You get a guy, Lamar Jackson, next week. Yeah, John Wolford had nearly 500 yards total offense in this game, and Syracuse gets Lamar Jackson next week, the defending Heisman Trophy winner, and a guy who seemingly gets 500 yards of total offense just by showing up at the game. And it was amazing to see the lack of anticipation, I think is the word. I mean, at one point, I think we all knew it's going to be John Wolford left. It's going to be John Wolford right. It didn't appear that Syracuse spied him. They just got caught off guard by the way, a Wake Forest offense that's missing its best receiver, Greg Dortch, who is a terrific all-ACC freshman receiver. Didn't even play in this game. He's been out for the past couple of weeks, but it did not matter because Wolford did his thing, 500 yards nearly of total offense. Matt Colburn had, 263 yards? No, I'm sorry, 239 yards rushing in this game. And a Syracuse defense that at least had played at a competent level, at least had played at a competitive level this year and had kept this team in games, was nowhere to be seen today. So the whole charade with Eric Dungy came right up until game time. Dino Babers saying in his press conference that it was a game time decision, but ultimately they didn't want to go with him. And this is truly a tale of two halves for Zach Mahoney. In the first half of this game, Zach Mahoney was 22 of 35 for 297 yards and 3 touchdowns. He was quick. He was decisive. After, some bad throws early on, he was accurate. He was moving the offense. This was a guy that found Ravian Pierce, which I was happy to see because I think that's a guy they've got to use a little bit more in the offense. He was getting the ball to Steve Ishmael. He was getting the ball to Irv Phillips. He was getting just enough help from the running game, but the floodgates opened in the second half. And, it's amazing because Syracuse – so let's just go through this a little bit here. And glad that you're joining us here. Like and share this to let people know we're here. Leave your comments there. We'll go through some of these as we go, but you guys can talk amongst yourselves here in the comments while I'm discussing this as well. So get into the second half, right? We mentioned that Wake Forest, right before halftime, only 16 seconds on the clock, and they sneak a field goal in there, which was just incredible to see them go up the field that quickly. But they were shredding the Syracuse defense all day. So Wake cuts the lead to start the second half. It's 38-27. Syracuse responds, okay, and they kick a field goal, and now it's 41-27. That's a 14-point lead for Syracuse at that point. Wake immediately answers with a touchdown. John Wolford runs in, basically untouched. It's 41-34. So then Wake Forest scores again. There's a touchdown, but then what I thought was the momentum changer that Syracuse needed, because even with a 14-point lead, you're looking around like, man, Wake Forest is not going away. This defense is awful today. It felt like they were in control of the game, and they're down by 14 points. But how about that blocked extra point? Chris Slayton reaches up, knocks it down. Scoop Bradshaw runs the other way. And all of a sudden, even though Wake Forest just scored a touchdown, it's 43-40. So following that, here's a major mistake on Dino Babers' part. Now, would it matter given how bad the defense was today? We can debate that. But for some reason, with Syracuse holding a 3-point lead, instead of going for first downs, instead of going up the field, they take 3 shots at the end zone. And I thought right there that something turned. And, well, here you go. John Wolford on 4th and 1. And again, embarrassing that they don't have anybody that's spying him. All he's doing is going around the end. It's 4th and 1. The whole world knows he's going to play action the ball. He's going to run left or right. It's just a matter of which direction does he go in. And on 4th and 1, John Wolford runs for a touchdown. Incredible at that point. Then Zach Mahoney throws an interception, and you saw it. The floodgates open here. So all told, Wake Forest had 736 yards of total offense unofficially. Syracuse ran 99 plays for 621 yards. We said this last year, guys. At the end of the season against Pittsburgh, now that game didn't mean anything. Syracuse, even though they're 4-6, if they win their last 2 games, they're still bowl eligible. That seems like a pretty tall mountain to climb at this point because, as Dino Babers put it himself, they're on the cliff now. There's no room for error, okay? That Pitt game last year, they didn't have a shot at a bowl game, but I don't think it's crazy to suggest that if you score 61 points in a football game, you should win that football game. I don't think it's crazy for me to suggest if you score 38 points in a football game in one half, you should win that football game. If you score 43 points in a football game, most of the time you should win it, even with how crazy we've seen offenses explode and the spread offense and where we're at in college football today. That's how bad the defense was today. And, again, it was uncharacteristic of them. But everybody's kind of got in the back of their mind that we saw this a bit last year. Dave Clawson, the Wake Forest head coach, he just kept going up the middle of the field. They didn't do anything out of this world, guys. They just attacked the middle of the field, exploited the fact that Syracuse has Antoine Cordy and Jordan Martin out at safety. And, look, I think Zaire Franklin ended up with about 14 tackles in this game, but it just seemed like he wasn't where he needed to be. Paris Bennett did not have the usual dominant game. Alt Robinson made some plays out there in the pass rush, and there were some plays made defensively, but for the most part, just an open gate and the waters flooded in. So, okay, they're 4-6. They blew one at home here. So John Wolford, who, by the way, to be fair, last week against Notre Dame had over 500 yards of total offense. And Wake Forest scored 37 points on Notre Dame, who scored, as I said a moment ago, if you score 43 points in a football game, you should win that football game. Notre Dame scored 48. But Wake Forest has been on a roll offensively here. This didn't come out of nowhere. They did that to Notre Dame. They put up 42 points and nearly 600 yards of total offense against Louisville. So Wake Forest is a team that's been rolling, but see, they've been giving up a lot of points and a lot of yards. And the Syracuse offense, with or without Eric Dungy today, proved in the first half that they could move the ball in this team and had a 17-point lead. To ask your defense to hold a 17-point lead is not too much to ask. And not only did Syracuse not do that, they got their doors blown off here today. 64-43. I keep looking at that score. That's an ACC basketball score at times. Syracuse played a basketball game last night, and the halftime score of that game, I got it right here. So Syracuse-Cornell last night was 33-22 at halftime, and that's a bad offensive half for both teams, right? The halftime score of this game was 38-24. This was a basketball game. This was crazy. So let's see what you guys are saying in the comments here, and it's really a matter of this. Do you believe that Syracuse can recover from this and win 2 games here? Because they have no choice if they want to go to a bowl game. One's at Louisville next week. Boston College. Now, Boston College lost to NC State today, but, that was a tough, physical, tooth-and-nail football game. A.J. Dillon is running like crazy. He has just exploded here in the second half of the season. So it was John Wolford today. Next week it's Lamar Jackson. Boston College, A.J. Dillon is playing out of his mind right now. And if this Syracuse defense doesn't find a fix, when you watch these games, and I made this joke on Twitter during the game, but if you watch these games, that Flex Seal commercial comes on a lot. I think Syracuse needs whatever the football equivalent of Flex Seal is, okay? Because this defense has sprung a leak and is showing signs of what they were not only a year ago, but at times, right? But again, you look at the scores this year, nothing anywhere close to this. Syracuse had kept the scores down, had been competitive, had given their offense an opportunity here. And the irony is today was the opposite. One thing I said before this game, was saying on the radio a little bit, was saying it on Twitter, that Syracuse had to start fast, which was asking a lot considering either A, Eric Dungy wasn't going to play, or Zach Mahoney did, and Zach Mahoney did. But I said, you've got to take control of this game. You've got to play much better in the first half and grab the reins of this thing at home. And they did that. It's amazing. I asked for more plays from special teams. Sean Riley was much better on kick returns today, but Cole Murphy misses a couple of kicks. Now, look, one was from 45, one was from 51, but that 51-yarder totally shanked it. It was not partially blocked. It was not, what would happen last week at Florida State, where they got a lot of pressure and got their hand on the ball. He just totally shanked that thing. And by the way, he just became today the all-time leading kicker in Syracuse history. He has more single-season field goals and more career field goals than John Biskup, than Gary Anderson, than Nate Trout, than a number of amazing kickers that have come through here in recent times. And I think that's a sign of, how much offenses have picked up and how much, there's just so much more opportunity for kickers to get on the field. But he let Syracuse down again today. I'm sorry, indoors, at home, those are long distances, but you can't. Cole Murphy's now missed 4 kicks in the last 2 games after being nominated for the Lou Groza Award, which goes to the best kicker in the country. So there was a letdown there on special teams. Syracuse ran the ball a little bit better than they did last week. Dante Strickland got a little hobbled on that 4th down touchdown run that he had. I think Mo Neal made some great plays today, but just not enough. It was just a complete breakdown in the second half. Again, Syracuse outscored. Somebody correct my math on this if I'm wrong. 40-5 in the second half. That's incredible. Let's see a little bit of what you guys are saying in the comments here. Joe asking where the pass rush and the tackling was. There was nothing there. They couldn't get any pass rush on Wolford. They couldn't stop him when he got around the ends. Even the plays that remember that 3rd and 16 play kind of coming down the stretch there when Syracuse was still within striking distance. Poor tackling there. So a complete breakdown on that front. Joe also saying time to shift to basketball. Too bad. It's a team of unknown everything as well. I was saying this today a little bit that here we are. It's November 11th, by the way. Happy Veterans Day to all that serve out there, who have served and are currently serving our country. We thank you from the bottom of our hearts for doing that. But I said it earlier today, here it is November 11th, and we still care about football. Yeah, basketball played last night, and the Boeheim versus Boeheim story was great, and we're all curious to see how this basketball team develops, but it's not we've completely turned the page on football. Well, now I think you might have that danger of people turning the page on football. Wake me up if they win a couple games here. People were engaged. They were interested. They were following along here. But this was not a loss to a top-flight team. This was not a loss to a top 25 team. Wake is good. Wake can score. They showed that today. But you got to beat this team at home. Now, instead of having to win 2 of your last 3 and you control your own destiny, you still kind of control your own destiny, but having your back up against that proverbial wall and having to win 2 straight games, given how the defense fell apart today, not an easy task. Mary Ellen says, I think we're done, and I'd be very surprised if they won another game. George saying in the comments here that defensively, Syracuse regressed, terrible tackling, terrible everything. Brian noting that the defense looked physically and mentally spent. And they did, Brian, and you can see that it's amazing what we see and how we can just spot things just watching the game. They did. They looked confused. They looked spent. They looked frustrated. And again, Wake Forest wasn't doing anything out of this world. It was just John Wolford this way, John Wolford that way, right up the gut, Matt Colburn running the football. They didn't do anything out of this world, especially when Syracuse was up. You're up 38-21. You have a 17-point lead on these guys. I understand that they're talented offensively, and they've done this, as I said, to Notre Dame and Louisville and Georgia Tech and the past few weeks. They've really done this, but their defense, Wake Forest defense is terrible. Their secondary is vulnerable. They didn't have their best safety in there today. Jesse Bates is their best defensive player, and not only that, Duke Ejiofor, who had 14 and a half tackles for a loss coming into this game, he left the game with an injury. Yeah, again, I know Zach Mahoney's the quarterback, but Zach Mahoney showed me in the first half he can at least just competently lead this team to 38 points. Then your defense just has to kind of hold on. So there was just a complete drop-off, a complete breakdown all around here. Very frustrating day, very frustrating loss for Syracuse. Who would have thought that this team would be 0-3 after that Clemson game? Let's go back to the last time Syracuse was at home, and they beat Clemson on Friday the 13th. Now, we all knew how close that game was. They knocked Kelly Bryant out of that game, but the momentum and the confidence and the national appeal that came from that, Syracuse was the toast of college football, and Dino pulls off another upset, and people calling to pay Dino and extend his contract. And, by the way, I still feel that way. I still think this coaching staff should be locked down. Maybe not all of them. I think Brian Ward's status is up in the air a little bit here, but given the choice between starting over again and at least proceeding forward here, letting Dino build this thing up, I'd like to see that happen. Now, that being said, they haven't won a game since, and they've been in every game. The Miami game, they were right there. The Florida State game, they were right there. I'm going to flip the light back on here quickly. They were right there. And then this game, at least for a half, they looked like, okay, this is going to be a wild game. It's going to be one of those crazy back-and-forth football games here. But to get outscored in the second half 40-5, it's just it's mind-boggling is what it is. So this is going to be a true test. Yeah, Paul says it right there in the comments, and he nailed it. It's the Clemson hangover. This team does have a Clemson hangover. That was 3 games ago. That shows you that this team is still developing and still has a lot to learn, because the highs and lows that come from a college football season and how coaching staffs build up confidence and how coaching staffs manage that wave. Well, we've now – think about it. The low of Middle Tennessee State, embarrassing loss at home, the Scott Schaefer victory cigar. But Syracuse recovered from that, beat Clemson, beat Pittsburgh after that, but then beat Clemson. They were competitive against NC State. They were competitive against LSU. They had not lost a game by less than 10 points. There was encouraging signs there. People are buying in, saying, okay, I see where this is going. I see the improvement. How about that defense? None of the big scores like we saw last year. Miami and Florida State, okay, frustrating. They should have won probably one or both of those games, but okay, we see where we're going here. And then today, splat, another low. But they've got an opportunity to make up for this. So this is going to be that second huge test for Dino Babers and this staff. The first one came early in the year against Middle Tennessee State, but at least you had, a lot more room for error there. You have none at this point. You have to win the last 2 games of the season, and you have to do it. Now, Louisville has not had the season they would want, but Lamar Jackson could do exactly today what John Wolford did to Syracuse today next week. if not better. It's funny because Dino Babers brought this up in his press conference. He said, when's the last time you saw a quarterback do that to us? And that quarterback was Lamar Jackson, and Dino remembered that a little bit later on in that statement. Oh, yeah, it's the guy we see next week, Lamar Jackson. Ken, in the comments, asked a question saying, how long before Syracuse turns the corner? Is it a matter of having the right athletes to run Dino's offense and defense? I don't think it's a matter of having the athletes, to answer your question, Ken. It's more depth. And I think we showed today in watching this game, Syracuse doesn't have the depth on defense. They were kind of getting away with it for a while, but Dave Clawson went right at the safety positions. You got to build up depth on this team. I think they're getting enough athletes. I think we've seen that with guys like Mo Neal emerging and some players that are getting an opportunity on offense. I think we're starting to see that a little bit on defense. As Scoop Bradshaw comes up, some younger players on the defense. Now, some of these guys were inherited and were here. Zaire Franklin and Paris Bennett and Antoine Cordy. These are all players from the previous coaching staff. But you do have to keep recruiting athletes. It's an attractive offense to play in. What you've now got to work on, though, is convincing defensive players to want to commit because the depth isn't quite there on defense. I thought they turned a corner, though, honestly, when you beat Clemson. That's turning your corner because that's the second year in a row you defeated not only a ranked team, but in that case, the number one team in the country, one of the top teams in college football. If that's not a mark of Syracuse has turned a corner, I really don't know what is. The other turning the corner moment could have been, and this is where not taking advantage of that momentum is disappointing, you make a bowl game. Because you make a bowl game, it's not just the prestige of, hey, look what Syracuse did through that impossibly tough schedule. They still eked out a bowl game. You know what it is? It's the 15 practices. It's the development that the team needs by qualifying for a bowl game, and now that's up in the air because they've got to win 2 straight just to get there. Joe saying the corner isn't going to get turned this year, maybe middle of next year, beginning of the year after, have to replace a lot of big key defensive players next year, and that's a great point. Dino mentioned that for the offense, it was year 2, games 4 through 6. It was the 7th game where the Clemson win came in. So there are signs there. This is one game. This is the first game all year, like we mentioned. They lost by more than 10 points, but boy, did the floodgates open here. So now it's a matter of how do you respond with one of the best players in college football on the slate next year, who single-handedly can win a game, and then a Boston College team who, yes, A.J. Dillon's playing great, and they've really turned a corner, but that's a game you can win at home. Boston College is not going to come in here in a couple of weeks and do what Wake Forest did today. That's going to be more of a ground-and-pound physical type of football game. Syracuse has to be able to hang with a team like that, though. It's almost the opposite of what we saw today. And they don't have the running game to do that. And now with Eric Dungey's status up in the air, Zach Mahoney, if anything, has been part of some of the weirdest games in Syracuse history. I mean, think about it. Zach Mahoney's a quarterback a couple years ago. Syracuse only loses by 10 to LSU at the Carrier Dome. The Pittsburgh game last year, which was just I still want to pass out when I think about that game. It was moving so fast. The fourth quarter alone of that game was 27-20. Think about that. Second half of this game, Syracuse got outscored 40-5. So at least they were competitive in that Pittsburgh game. It was just, it was a video game last year. And then he gets in there today. So what's the procedure now with Dungey? They did the treatment. They were careful with him. They went right up until game time and then said, no, not today. How will that change next week, and how will that change with Boston College, if at all? That's a big question mark, because do you have confidence that Zach Mahoney can win both of those games? Because as fun as he is to watch sometimes, as much as he piles up numbers and makes you kind of buy in and say, wow, this kid can come in and at least do what a backup quarterback's supposed to do, well, then the second half of this game happens, right? Started out the game 22 of 35. He finished 33 of 60 for 384 yards. He had 297 yards, 3 touchdowns at halftime. And there's a reason this kid's a backup quarterback. So, wow, that was quite a game at the Dome today. Syracuse loses 64-43. Wake Forest is now bowl eligible. They're 6-4. The Orange fall to 4-6 and have to win out just to get a bowl game, just to get a bowl. But I know there's that scenario at 5-7, but you can't count on that. You want to control your own destiny and get that 6th win. Embarrassing performance for the defense. Brian Ward and that defense has a lot of questions to answer. They've got a lot of soul searching to do this week. They've got to figure out now how to contain one of the most explosive players in college football. So bad loss today, no doubt about it. A surprising loss in a way, particularly with a 17-point lead at the Carrier Dome. So another big challenge here for Dino Babers and his crew. The toast to the town a couple of weeks ago after that Clemson win, how things turn. This is why sports is great, because of the drama that ensues. You can't write this stuff. Just a couple of weeks ago, Dino Babers was the toast of the town, and now people are kind of looking at the coach saying, all right, you got to save this thing. How are you going to do it? The beauty of sports. So we'll see how they do next week at Louisville. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think we have a game time on that yet. Is that a 3 o'clock game next week? I think so. Correct me if I'm wrong. But whenever the game is over, we'll be back here on Facebook Live doing this again. Please look for my recap on syracuse.com. That'll be up on Sunday morning as usual, and all the great coverage from Stephen Bailey and Nate Mink and Chris Carlson and the whole team, Dennis Nett on the photos. We'll have all of our coverage up on syracuse.com Saturday and, of course, on Sunday. And we'll be back here next week. And, by the way, we'll be doing some of this for basketball season as well, both the recaps and the Facebook Lives as that is underway as well. So keep an eye on that. But for today, Syracuse loses to Wake 64-43. Very disappointing, frankly, embarrassing loss for the Orange. It's not over yet, but no room for error the rest of the way for the Orange at 4-6. We'll talk to you again after the Louisville game next week. Thanks for joining us here tonight on Facebook Live. Have a great rest of your weekend, everybody. Go Bills.